Welcome to SBME Interfaces. Our goal with this show is to introduce you to the people that interface with biomedical engineering, from students and faculty to staff and industry, and everyone in between. BME is a broad field that encompasses so many different perspectives, journeys, skill sets, and backgrounds, and we are excited to share them all with you.
So we're very excited today to be interfacing with Kelly McNagny and Fabio Rossi. Kelly completed his undergrad at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, then did a PhD in immunology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, followed by a postdoctoral fellowship at the European Molecular Biology Lab in Heidelberg, Germany. He's been a professor at UBC for a number of years. Currently, he's joined between the School of Biomedical Engineering and Medical Genetics. He's also associated with the Heart and Lung Institute at St. Paul's. He's Associate Scientific Director of AllerGen Network, and he oversees two of the core facilities within the Biomedical Research Center. And his research interests lie in hematopoietic stem cell biology. Fabio Rossi completed his MD from, pardon my Italian, Università di Genoa, a PhD at also European Molecular Biology Laboratories in Heidelberg, a postdoc at Stanford, and then he's been at UBC since 2001. He's currently Director of Research at the School of BME, as well as the Associate Director, and the current Director of the Biomedical Research Center, which will be coming to an end in a couple of days. He also oversees the BC Regenerative Medicine Cluster. And his research focuses on the biology and therapeutic application of adult stem cells, specifically on the role of inflammation and regeneration, and on the role of stem cells in degenerative disease. Welcome both.
Thank you, Pai.
Thank you.
All right, fellas. So I want to start with this last year. How it's been difficult for everybody, but I'd like to ask you, and more importantly, how it's impacted your work. Has there been sort of a research and progress cost to having to shut down when the lockdowns first occurred, and how that's been going for you? We can start with Fabio.
Yeah, I mean, there clearly has been a cost, not so much for me in terms of research, because I spend my days in front of a computer typing away, so I can do it at home. But personally, I suffer from the lack of interaction. I mean, normally we would bump into each other in the hallway, and a lot of interesting ideas and conversations start that way. And that's how I am affected. Now, my lab, if I have to be honest, the experiments we do are very often, rush and then wait. And so, because they're in vivo, they take longer. It's not like you have to be there every 3 hours. So I think the experiments have been affected less than I predicted, because with the fact that we have been able to get organized and get people back into the lab at a reasonable level, early on, they have been proceeding okay. Obviously, starting new experiments was a problem, but we had so many old experiments going that were like on a year timeline that, some of them are still going and they were started at a curtailment. So it wasn't too terrible. You should ask the people in the room.
Yeah.
What about you, Kelly?
I would agree with Fabio that initially, in some ways, it was a godsend, because we had all this data that had been piling up that we hadn't published. And I always encourage my students to write things up, but they drag their feet a little bit. So initially we got a lot of papers out that we hadn't addressed, and we should have. And so that was good. But then it's starting to wear now when you can't interact with other people as directly as you used to. And one of the most exciting things at the BRC has been this open concept building, where you bump into people all the time and you share ideas with people who don't work on the same things, and you get better ideas that way. And I would say that part of it has really been the biggest impact for me. And also the ability or inability of students to come into my office every 15, 20 minutes and just say, hey, what do you think about this idea or that idea? That part's been missing.
Absolutely. It'll shape their careers for a long time to come, for sure.
Yeah.
Although, if I can add something, we had to learn a whole bunch of new social networking tools like Slack. And I must say, I'm impressed. They work really well, and I think they're not going to go away.
No, for sure. for sure. And people are saying that hybrid working models will be the new norm. So let's see how that works. It'll be interesting. So let's get the obvious question out of the way. What for both of you has been exciting for SBME to be established and the future of SBME? Okay. Fabio?
I go first. I talk too much, so you need to stop me. Okay?
Sorry.
Hey, you said it's about getting to know people, and that's an important thing to know about.
We'll edit in a cane that like pulls you aside.
Something like that. So, I was very excited. I have always been, I'll confess this now, I always kind of a little bit had a bit of regret going into medicine and not engineering when I was a kid, because I always liked to tinker, right? And now I'm tinkering with biology, but and so I was happy when the school started, and there were a number of reasons. First of all, intellectual, as I just said, but also because the BRC had been around for quite some time, and while it had gone through some internal renewal, it was probably perceived from the outside to be a little stale. And in my opinion, we got to the point it was either change or die, and of course, I like change in general, unlike many other people's that, they need to be dragged with. So for me, it was, an invitation to a party, really. And I must say that I am still very happy about it. Although, I can see that the direction of the center and, the school in general isn't quite what I was aligned for, but that's, you can be an optimist or a pessimist, and I see it in a good way. It's going to drag me into areas that I wasn't thinking about. And, the interesting stuff these days is at the interface between those areas.
For sure. What about you, Kelly?
Fabio is exactly right. It's always when you get thrown into an environment that you're not ready for that you learn the most. And I think that's why I find the scientists who are most interesting are the ones who have traveled quite a bit and worked in different places. They have a depth and an open-mindedness that others don't have. So with respect to the BRC, that was something that attracted me to it initially. Everybody was from somewhere else and they had a different perspective. But as Fabio said, it kind of started to get stale. And I think SBME, which is technology driven, and also a big strength that we've always had at the BRC, it adds this new dimension of adding technology to some of the things that we really didn't have before. And it's making a lot of us think in new ways that it's going to be good for all of our science.
That's great.
I like this idea of you guys being sort of dragged almost out of like a routine or a habit that you've been in. Do you see that spreading further, like beyond SBME into other disciplines? Do you think that it's necessary that it should?
Absolutely. I think when you stagnate, you die in science for sure, right? And so I would like to see us linked with as many diverse programs as possible. There's always this cost-benefit ratio where if you go too far afield, then you start losing the ability to contribute. And so I think we've been careful not to do that. But going into new fields where you have a little bit less expertise, but you have something to bring to the table, but that field has a problem to offer that you can address, that's the interface you want to find.
Career-wise, it's tricky because, who's this guy that is not in our field who's trying to tell us how it works? That's the often there is. But you just have to let it slide over you and keep going.
Sure.
So exactly, some of those grants that I remember applying for, where people would say, "But wait a minute, this is a new field for this investigator. He doesn't have that expertise," and so they kind of question: Are you focused? Are you just kind of all over the place? And Fabio and I think, have ignored that criticism to a certain extent, and I think it was to our benefit. And again, it's that cost-pain ratio. And I think we've walked that line pretty carefully, but I think we've done better than the average simply because we did take a chance.
Mm-hmm. I think it's, if you can't get over that sort of that institutional thinking, we've always done it this way. If you can't get over that mindset, then yeah, I can see you're right. Actually, like stagnation equals death in this field, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So Fabio, what drew you to pursue an academic career, especially starting with an MD? And as you mentioned before, how you have regrets on that front.
All right, I'm going to tell you the story. So, I come from a family with two medical doctors. In fact, both of them are psychiatrists, which might explain a lot to the people that. And and so, I was kind of following the path of least resistance when I decided to go into med school. And then around the second year, I started taking biology courses. And I remember the one day I decided, that's it, I'm going into research. It was when I took this class where they were teaching about Mary Lyon. So I fell in love with this lady. Now, not Mary Lyon herself, but her hypothesis of X chromosome inactivation. We're talking history here, right? But back then, kind of somewhat new. And I was just fascinated that nature would have developed such precise and yet complex mechanism to regulate gene expression. And my jaw dropped and I said, I need to know more about this. And then I looked at medicine on the other hand, which, I do have some regrets because I would love to be more active in terms of patients and things like this at this point. But it looked like a lot of routine kind of grudging work, which didn't attract me, honestly, possibly because of my inherent ADHD. So, that's when I decided I was going into research. And then it continued because I went for a summer experience at EMBL. At the time, EMBL was very young. Now, imagine, this guy, fourth year of medicine, 22-year-old maybe, go to this European extraterritorial institute where it was young enough that I think the average age must have been 24 or 25, something like this. In fact, we were joking that it wasn't a research institute, it was a facility for eugenic breeding of young scientists. Yes. But the point is, I enjoyed it so much. The environment was so intellectually stimulating, the work was interesting, and the people around were a lot of fun. I was also the first time seriously out of my home country and, first experience. So sometimes it just takes being at the right place at the right time to take a path that then you're not gonna veer away from. And that's what happened to me. And then I went back to EMBL for a PhD, and that's where I met the character there, Kelly McNagny. Took me months before I could understand anything he was saying, let me tell you, because at the time, you wouldn't believe it, he was speaking with a strong Alabama accent. You can ask him why.
Well, now we got to follow up. Talk to me about the Alabama accent.
It was the only way I could be understood where I was. And so, I've always been really bad at picking up accents. I spent part of my youth in the South and part in the North. And so my accent would shift depending on where I was. And it took me a little longer to slow down a little bit and then change my vowels enough so Fabio could follow. So, and I was quite amused when Fabio told me that he went to Stanford and he said, hey, what do you reckon about this? And people looked at him and say, what hillbilly school did you go to?
Yes.
In terms of background, it's quite funny, actually. So I didn't realize this, but Fabio and I had the same kind of background, different story. So I went to engineering school because I had two engineers in my family, my father and my brother. And at that stage, a lot of engineering, I have to say, was very dry. So it was petroleum engineering and preparing to work on the oil rigs in Texas.
Right.
And first couple of years I did okay, but it was miserable for me. It was a slog. And then they had just started a new biology and biotechnology program where they were merging engineering principles with biology, much like what we're doing now, but in a much more superficial way. But it captivated me. I got so interested in that. And that led me to kind of explore grad school in a place where I could do kind of more genetic engineering and things like that. That was the rage at the time. And that's what led me to Alabama, because people were just cloning immune genes. I happened to work in a really, really exceptional lab there where they were trying to understand regulation of immunoglobulin receptors and T cell receptors. And that was a big opportunity, and it's kind of what launched me into science.
Cool.
So Fabio, tell us a little bit more about BC RegenMed.
Right. Well, BC Regenerative Medicine is really stemmed from. I need 1 second to think on how to put this diplomatically. Okay.
No worries.
There was a vacuum in Vancouver. And the vacuum was due to the fact that we had really excellent stem cell scientists in town for many, many years. But somehow they were all siloed by institution. You know, the guys on campus, the guys at BC Cancer, the guys at CMMT, and there wasn't enough cooperation and communication between them. And I am not naive enough to think that you can do these things in the long term. You know, getting the PIs to talk to each other, it's great, but it's not what really makes the community. You need to get the trainees to talk to each other, right? To know what each other is doing. And so, you know, after waiting for many years, because honestly, I felt too junior to do something like this, for someone else to, you know, take the leadership and bring the community together, then I decided that, you know, it needed to be done and nobody else was doing it. And so, look, I'll be completely honest. I have never looked for director positions or you know, management. I would be, I think, significantly happier if I could just do my research in my lab. But the problem is, in order to do that, you need the right environment. And if you don't have the right environment, that's not going to work. And so sometimes you have to stick your neck out. And so now BC RegMed has been going on for 5 years, and I'm pretty pleased, although COVID, you know, made things more complicated. I mean, Zoom fatigue does exist, I guarantee you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, yeah. And but at least we really have a little bit more of participation, communication. You know, I know now everybody that is. I think I know everybody that is in this business in Vancouver. And I didn't a few years ago, right? And we also used it as a trampoline to launch, you know, bridges to other places. Like, for example, we have a great relationship with UW in Seattle, where every year we have a meeting together of the regenerative medicine communities. It did not happen before BC RegMed was put together, and it was a damn shame because they're super strong communities. So that's how it came about. You know, I'll be completely honest, after 5 years of running it, I would love if someone stuck their neck out and picked up the torch.
Hint,
but
hint.
it's a lot of work.
This is a call to arms from Fabio. We have a large podcast following,
Yes.
so, and we recruited new people.
The job here.
Yeah.
But,
I'm gonna make a comment there too, because I'll make a quick comment there too, because now Fabio is like being modest, but Fabio, ever since I've known him, has been outstanding at leading things. Honestly, he has. And he's been dragged into it reluctantly sometimes, but people always recognize. And I don't know whether it was the Italian upbringing where he knows how to make something out of chaos. I have no idea. But he's always had an amazing talent for that. And I think maybe he got dragged into this, but he's done an exceptional job. And he recognized there was an opportunity that just wasn't getting, you know, used. And so he filled that void. So I'm not going to let you get off the hook that easy, Fab.
No, and I think we're trying to build that DNA into the SBME. We need to build. There's a lot to be built, and we'll rely on you and other visionaries to build it. So that's the key. Maybe I'll do the next question, Miguel, because it's sort of. And Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about the AllerGen network?
AllerGen network, interesting. So that was something I kind of got dragged into. So, you know, I was working on genes and cell types that were related to allergy and asthma, but not, you know, kind of specifically focused on that. And I was at a meeting where the heads of that network were just getting started. And those were largely clinicians and people who are more in kind of healthcare delivery. And they wanted to bring in scientists and more social people, social studies people. And so they made this new network, and it was an opportunity for me to come in and bring science and set up platforms for the network. And it was great. They did a number of big projects that were Canada-wide, got a birth cohort to try to understand how allergies start in kids. And I got to contribute to the science of that. The clinicians got to contribute to the etiology of the disease. And then it fed out to the people who are kind of the advocates for how you help patients with allergies and childhood asthmas and fear of anaphylaxis and peanut allergies. So that was a network that I really enjoyed participating in because, again, it dragged me out of my comfort zone, but I had a lot to contribute to it. And it's been wildly successful. That birth cohort has gotten international recognition. And the other thing they did, which was a really cool concept that I think Canada should do more often, is they had a collection of really well-characterized patients that had mild allergies. And there were drug companies who were dying for those types of well-characterized patients where they can test their new therapies and make sure that they work well and maybe advance technologies quickly. And so we would have agreements where Pfizer or Amgen would bring in a new drug, say, try this on the mild allergics in a safe way. They would show a fabulous response. They'd write the Nature paper. The drug company would benefit because they showed they had something efficacious, and the researchers benefit because they'd made a breakthrough in allergy. So it was another really interesting thing for Canada as a network. I think we should have more programs like that.
Sure, absolutely.
Digging into that a little bit, actually, Kelly, in many of our communications back and forth, I've seen that you've got like really big, strong ideas about everything from scientific policy to scientific funding. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Is there a place where you think we're doing well in Canada, and is there a place where you frankly think we're falling on our face when it comes to that?
Sure. So I think with regard to the science, I think we are very high above the average mark. I think, on average, Canadian scientific papers are cited twice as many times as papers from other countries, which speaks to the quality of the science. Where we're falling down a bit, I think, is in the investment in science, particularly long-term investment. Canada is very good at responding to crises, but there's been less of a long-term commitment to increasing budgets for science annually. And, the years from 2004 to 2015 or so were the worst. And so that jeopardizes our leadership. And I think better long-term commitment and strategic in a way. So long-term commitment, but with a focus on changing the way we move new things into the clinic and into companies in biotech industry is something we could do much better, I think. And I think Fabio can speak to it as well, but I think the biotech industry is starting to look much better, but it needs more.
Mm-hmm.
So Fabio, on that regard, I want to pick on something. We really lack in manufacturing and other resources, and it's come to highlight this year and last year. It's kind of embarrassing, I would say. So I know you're pushing on some fronts on that, and Peter as well. What's your thoughts on that? Where can we go?
Well, I mean, the gap in manufacturing is pretty obvious. And it's becoming clear that manufacturing medicines is as important as food security for a country. So I am hopeful that this is not going to be like SARS was, where a number of lessons have been learned and then forgotten within a year. And now we're back to scratch. So this one was a little more impactful. So hopefully we'll create some longer memory in the politicians, right? But, like Chomsky says, it's a lot easier to do reforms when you're in a crisis because people don't dare complaining about them as much. And this is, this is what we are seeing these days, hopefully, right? I mean, if I have to complain about science policy and be specific, then I would go after the dismal support for a technology course in Canada. I mean, 15 years ago, I don't even remember when it was at this point, CIHR had a program in which they were supporting the operation of course, which would lower the user fees of this course and they would become at everybody's reach. I'm talking about academic course. I'm not talking about NSERC or something like this. I think they are doing okay there. Although I have the strong impression that is a kind of a Quebec, Ontario mafia. But beyond that, those programs disappeared, and the politicians had this brilliant idea to replace them all with the CFI, which is great. The CFI gives you money for innovating piece of equipment. great. The innovating piece of equipment, we definitely need a program like that. But what about the run-of-the-mill piece of equipment that nobody is supporting anymore? Essentially becomes a huge barrier to young new labs to enter this arena. And biology no longer happens like it used to when me and Kelly started, where you pick your favorite gene and you mutate every amino acid. That doesn't cut it anymore. You need to take a step back and have a bigger bird's eye view of the biological process. And you're using a high throughput collection and analysis of data is a completely different business. Technology is absolutely critical these days. And the fact that this is left really, I don't know, to the goodwill of people like me and Kelly busting our behind to keep course going, I think it's a problem.
Yeah, I can follow up with that on one thing as well. So that speaks to, again, this long-term funding problem. Accordion funding is devastating, and by that I mean things that contract and expand. Picture a biotech company where you lay off all the employees after a couple of years, and then you try to hire them back a couple of years later when there's more funding again. It's devastating, right? So you need long-term funding. Politically, the problem is that everyone knows politicians get credit for starting new things, not for supporting old things. And so there's this tendency to every political cycle to create a new funding stream and a new way of getting money. And that may look great for the politicians, but it's bad for the research. So one way possibly of getting out of that box would be if Canada had something equivalent to the National Academy of Sciences like they have in the States, where they have this expert body which gives advice on how things should be taken care of in a scientific way, no politics involved. And then the government goes to them for advice. And that takes the political football out of the hands of the politicians and it puts it in front of the scientists and allows them to help make the decisions, which I think could actually help quite a bit. But anything to break that cycle of, starting something new and cutting something old would really help. And Fabio's absolutely right. Long-term support for technological cores are critical to staying ahead.
I have a feeling that you guys would be backed up by many, many people on this front.
I think so.
Yeah.
So
just go ahead. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I said maybe we can pivot. I know we're approaching time and get a little bit more on the fun side of stuff. So Miguel, why don't you start us off with something? Yeah,
sure. Can we have you guys for like 5 more minutes? Is that cool?
Of course.
Sure.
Okay, awesome. So first I want to start with Fabio. One of the things that stood out to me very first time I talked with you was that you really do have a touch of the poet about you when it comes to communicating about science and that sort of thing. Like you speak not just eloquently, but very engagingly, which is something that's very important to me. One of the things you said is that the SBME's purpose is to make science fiction a reality. And so I'd like to ask you, can you speak to the kinds of big dreams that you'd like to see become reality through the Biomedical Engineering, School of Biomedical Engineering?
My Lord, where do I start? I'll start with something simple. We see a lot of biologics getting into the market, drug delivery, right? There is no reason these biologics should be made outside of the body. They should be made inside of the body by a mini organ that is capable of regulating the production and delivery. Now, of course, by saying that, I just put a big, target on my head, because that's going to destroy a bunch of pharma business models right there, right? So, but, that is the idea. If you are, chronically depressed or something like this, there should be a little artificial gland somewhere close to your hypothalamus that secretes the right neurotransmitter when you need it.
Absolutely.
Is that science fiction enough?
Yes, that's brilliant.
Kelly, what about you? Do you have one top dream thing that could come out of this sort of interface of working that we're now doing in the school and with yourself and Fabio and others?
I would say finding, disease networks of genes that regulate disease and in surprising places. And Fabio works on these cells that are involved in making structures and organs, and I work on cells, the immune system. And 10 years ago, who would have thought that those cells talk to each other intimately in every single organ in your body? And yet that's what things are starting to look like now. So that's, a wave of the future, and it kind of gives you impinging points where you can tweak something here and have a readout in a place where you didn't expect it. And that offers tons of opportunities, but you need some good engineering principles to understand how that crosstalk happens. So I would love it if some of the immune cells I play with, I could tweak and fix some of the diseases that Fabio's working on and some of the organ models he uses.
That's cool.
Absolutely. All right, one last like personal question for Kelly. Tell us about your love of music. How did it start? Do you still have any time for it?
Oh man. So I've always, since I was 15, 16 years old, I always had a guitar in my hand. I was playing to myself because I was embarrassed about playing out in public. And but I got exposed to tons of really interesting music because it was, late 70s, early 80s, kind of punk rock came along, new wave came along. Then I went to Alabama, and Alabama's version of new wave was really interesting. But all that time I was kind of a closet musician. And then I went to EMBL, and I had people like Fabio encouraging me to get out and play. And the cool thing about Germany is nobody plays in public unless they've got, documentation that they had all this history of, taking music lessons and courses and everything else. So what was cool is Alabama, every street corner had a band and a musician, right? Germany, none. So there was this dearth. So I kind of filled this void, and I wasn't embarrassed because there was nothing else in town. So I was I had a captive audience. So we got together a bunch of other closet musicians, scientists. We formed the EMBL band called Major Groove and the Sticky Ends. And we were like the house band for every EMBL course, every EMBL conference. It was a good time. And so I just carried that on when I came back to North America. Yeah. And I still get time to play a little bit.
Good.
We have some retirement gigs at a bar in Vancouver. I will send you all invitations if you want to. You can all come.
Yes, absolutely.
You skipped the part where you were playing on the main street in Heidelberg with your guitar.
It's because we got no money.
Some other time, I'm going to ask you more questions about that, Kelly.
I know you two have a lot of fun facts and maybe dirt on each other, so we'll keep that for another podcast. Fabio, what's one of the, I know you do a lot of things, you run, you sail, what's one thing that really helps you unwind your busy day?
Any strenuous physical activity that keeps my brain engaged so that I can think about the next deadline or, what do I need to do to prepare for the meeting tomorrow. So that includes sailing. I was sailing yesterday, 25 knots. It was very interesting. Yes.
On a wind warning day?
Well,
a wind warning yesterday. I guess what better day?
Don't make me quote John Belushi, when the road gets tough.
There it is.
The toughs get going. And skiing, great. I went to Whistler this weekend, and I know it's controversial, but it was a day trip, perfectly socially isolated, and I didn't have to deal with anybody. And I went with a student in my lab. She's 25 years old, and she did not stop for a second. And we did every single double black on mountain. And she could have collected me with a spoon at the end of the day. I was happy.
That's fantastic. So we like to ask this question, get a sense, and we'll end it with this one, I guess. Kelly, first, if you could tell your 20-year-old self anything, what would it be? One thing.
Oh, God. Don't listen to what everybody tells you about careers and futures and everything else. Go where your passion is, because that set me off my feet for, a good 5 years. Every guidance counselor told me you're good in science, so you should go into hardcore engineering and work on oil rigs, right? And what a dumb mistake that was. Instead of exploring more interesting things that I was passionate about, I listened to what they told me my career should be. Big mistake. Do what your heart tells you, and you'll always do better.
Fabio?
I thought he was going to go for telling his 25-year-old self not to grow that afro that he had, but
it's the mustache.
Photos. I need photos. When this is done, I need photos. Okay, very important.
No, if I could talk to my 25-year-old at that time, so at 25, I was done with medicine and on my way to my PhD in Heidelberg. And I would tell my 25-year-old self to go back and freaking learn math properly. Because let me tell you, I went through a classical education and then through med school. I'd never learned math, and I'm suffering terribly for it now.
Oh yeah.
I'm happy to hold calculus tutorials for you.
Yeah, well, you won't be happy after you have one, but yeah.
Yeah.
So Miguel, take us home.
All right, guys. So are there any initiatives or projects or endeavors that you're overseeing right now that you're very excited about and you think people should get excited about too? We can start with you, Fabio.
Well, I am trying to turn BC RegMed from a knowledge translation initiative to a GREX, essentially a center of research excellence that can actually fund research and not just talk about research. So I'm kind of excited about that at the moment.
That's fantastic. Yeah. What about you, Kelly?
I'd say just the huge attention science has gotten in the past year is just, that excites me more than anything in many years. You know, we are suddenly the people who can solve problems again. People are paying attention to scientists again, and they're looking to them for help with and solutions with big problems. That's huge. You know, that provides everything that I would need to keep me busy for another 20 years.
That's fantastic.
Great. Thank you both. I know you're extremely busy, and thank you for taking the time. And it's great to have both of you on board with the school. You're both sounding boards and keep us level and faithful to engineers sometimes not being faithful. So thank you again.
My pleasure.